Hello everyone, welcome back to Fairycraft. So today we're going to start Chapter 1. We begin our journey into Faery in the direction of East, the element of air, with the quality of knowledge. Within the Western mystery tradition, which has been highly influential in most modern esoteric teachings, the element of air is associated with logic, law, and the mental realm. This led clearly to my choice of knowledge as being the quality to be associated with this direction and element. In order to be able to better understand your experiences as you progress through this book, it is essential to have some background knowledge on the subject. This will mean that you are building on a strong foundation, enabling you to place any experiences into context and equipping you with the necessary tools of interpretation and discrimination. It also helps prevent making easy yet critical mistakes due to simply not knowing any better. If early time is spent in dedication to learning as much as possible about fairy lore and history, as well as the traditions of the land around you, then this knowledge has time to properly grow within you like a seed, as you nourish it with the spiritual work of the successive chapters. In this chapter, we will cover the origins and nature of fairy, the concept of hierarchy, the darker side of fairy, basic etiquette, fairy beasts, and important symbols that are connected with the fairy realm. When the first baby laughed for the first time, its laugh broke into 1,000 pieces, and they all went skipping about, and that was the beginning of fairies. And now, when every new baby is born, its first laugh becomes a fairy. So there ought to be one fairy for every boy or girl. Unlike the fairies of J.M. Barrie's Neverland, we do not need to believe in fairy beings in order for them to exist, any more than we need to believe in the postman to receive our mail. But even those of us with close connections to the elusive fairy realm can find it difficult to explain exactly who they are, for their origins are as mysterious as their destiny, which is inextricably tied to our own. As definitions and understandings grow and change over the years, the term fairy has come to cover a vast variety of beings. In many ways, the more you learn, the more confusing it becomes, as the lines between fairies, gods, angels, elementals, ghosts, and other spirits become very blurred, if indeed those lines exist at all in some cases. We can expand our understanding by looking at myth and folklore. It is then up to the individuals to find, through their own experimental and intellectual exploration, their own insights, the grain of original truth that formed the pearl of myth. In her book English Folklore, Christina Hole writes, "They were not the same as nature spirits, though they were allied to them. They were a race apart, with their own laws and rulers, their own ambitions and occupations, marriages, births, and even, at long last, deaths." As explained in the introduction, the term fairy has become, in recent years, an umbrella term for many different classes of beings, though they were more distinctly divided in the past. This, allied with a wide availability of books founded on fancy rather than experience or research, may lead to some confusion. The modern interpretation of fairy beings is that they are first and foremost nature spirits, that is, the spirits of trees, plants, rivers, and the spirits of place. Perhaps that is because it is these beings who most call out for our attention at this time of environmental crisis. And forming a connection with these beings certainly forms the basis of most fairy work, as indeed it does in this book. However, if you look into older teachings in folklore, which are the only real written sources we have at our disposal, we can see that there is a distinct race, or perhaps several races, of beings whose existence is clearly connected to, yet independent of the land. Activities such as stealing babies and kidnapping midwives to look after them, or even stealing away young women for breeding purposes, speak of a dwindling race living out of time, who have, in the past, mixed their blood with ours to keep from extinction. Are such stories simply propaganda on the part of a church wishing to keep the powers of the otherworld as something to be feared? It becomes very difficult to know for certain. The fairy race, or races, was always considered to be made up of powerful beings who were often to be feared, especially if crossed in any way. Throughout the old tales, it is clear that they have lives and a culture that is distinct and comparable with our own, with marriages, births, and funerals. Though it has been suggested that these may be simple mockeries or reflections of our civilization, there seems to be more depth to it than that. Some subtle and intrinsic connection with our own lives and events. Through my own otherworldly contacts, I have experienced events that reflect our own customs, but with a very distinct cultural identity of their own. Thus it may be inaccurate terminology to refer to the fairy race as nature spirits, yet they are inhabitants and guardians of the inner landscape of our world, just as we are of the outer landscape, no matter what poor job we make of our guardianship. Nature spirits are an extremely important part of fairy work. We may see them as a point of mutual interaction and responsibility between ourselves and the fairy race, and through them the world soul, a relationship in which we are currently out of balance. Nature spirits may be found in all traditions around the world, reflecting the nature of the varying landscapes that they inhabit. In the Hindu tradition, they are known as Vidyashvaras, the guardians of the living world. In ancient Greece, the legends are full of nymphs, dryads, and satyrs who often mixed and interbred with both humans and gods. Native cultures around the world have a close relationship with the spirits of their land and a deep awareness of the mutual need for that connection. It is worth noting that the wilder and more inhospitable to human life the landscape is, the stronger and potentially more dangerous the spirits of that place will be. Hence, in mountainous regions, you will find great tall beings and races of giants, but in mostly domesticated and inhabited areas, the nature spirits can be seen as much gentler and smaller, unless there is an underlying power to the place that remains. Even when experienced in connecting with the spirits of the land, it can take some adjustment when traveling, normally a few days spent in an unfamiliar or ancestrally alien landscape, to make the energetic shift necessary to perceive them. But they are always there. To connect with the living energies of the world around us, from the tiniest flower to the greatest continent, is to live in harmony with our fairy cousins and experience a deeper understanding of the world and its needs. Since the realm of fairy is so all-encompassing and fluid in its nature, it is difficult and confusing to dwell too much on terminology, but it is beneficial to reach the understanding that not all beings that we think of as being fairy have the same natures, powers, or origins. As with any experience of fairy, if we try to grasp it too tightly, our understanding may slip away. Certainly, the closer you look, the more blurred and dividing lines become between fairies, nature spirits, elementals, spirits of place, and even ancient gods.
So I might make some pronunciation errors. I've had to keep trying to do this so many times because I want it to be perfect. But I was like, you know what, it's okay to make mistakes. So if I do make mistakes, forgive me, I'm really trying. So, ancient gods. In her book, The Fairies in Tradition and Literature, Catherine Briggs writes, "The earlier Celtic gods and goddesses are better represented among the fairies. Morgan le Fay is generally considered to descend from Morgan, the war goddess. Ainea, who is the fairy queen in Tarawan, is one form of Anu." For anyone used to the modern-day disempowered image of the tiny, childlike winged fairy that lives in a mushroom or shyly hides behind a flower, it would seem quite a leap to suggest that many faring beings were, or indeed are, gods. However, you do not need to delve very deeply into ancient tradition to discover that most of what are considered to be fairy kings and queens have also been worshipped as gods. Nor indeed do you need to take many steps into their world to understand the power they hold. One of the best-known examples of a crossover between deities and fairy lore may be found in the ancient Celtic myths of the Tuatha De Danann, our best source for which is the famous Book of Invasions. Though the text dates back to the 11th century, the original sources are widely believed to date back much further, incorporating material from as far back as the 4th century CE. Through the ancient myths, we learn that the Tuatha De Danann, the children of Danu, that's what I'm going to call them from now on, were a powerful race of magical beings who inhabited Ireland before they were driven underground by the Milesians, a race of mortal men. They arrived on ships from the four mythical cities of Phalius, Gorius, Murius, and Phineus, bringing with them treasures that bear a remarkable resemblance to the four Grail hollows of Arthurian lore: the Spear of Lu, the Sword of Nauda, the Stone of Fall, and the Cauldron of Dagda. We can also recognize these treasures as the four suits of the tarot. The children of Danu are considered to be the pre-Christian gods of Ireland. Interestingly, they were preceded by a race of giants called the Firbolgs, with whom they shared the land for a while before eventually going to war with another race of giants, the Fomorians. Both may be compared to the Titans of Greek mythology, great primal forces of the planet who were overcome eventually by the Olympian pantheon we are familiar with today.
Indeed, there are many tales throughout the world of an ancient race of giants who inhabited the earth before humanity, and these are also significant in fairy lore. The Sidhe, the fairy people of Celtic lands, are believed to be the descendants of these gods, and in some cases the gods themselves. Probably the best-known example of one of the Sidhe who is both a fairy queen and a goddess is the Irish war goddess named the Morrigan. She plays a major part in all the battles of the that's not how you say it. The children of Danu, and is a significant power within the Celtic pantheon.
Her name has been given to many places within the Celtic landscape, and her influence can be seen to spread through the lands and ages into many other tales and cultures. True to her shape-shifting nature, she has many guises, most notably Morgan le Fay of the Arthurian tales. Other people of this Sidhe who may be considered deities include Lugh, a solar deity, from whom we get the great Irish harvest festival of Lunasa. Nauda the Silver Hand, who was their king, Manannán mac Lir, a god of the sea, and Etain, who was both a sorceress and goddess of sovereignty. Scotland brings a strong, powerful giantess fairy queens to suit its rugged landscape and unforgiving climate. Here we find such fascinating figures as the Cailleach, a great shapeshifter of tremendous strength, who is often credited with forming the landscape, whose presence may be seen in folklore through the British Isles and beyond. I'm so sorry. A similar figure may be found in Nycnevin, the great fairy queen of Scottish lore who dwells beneath the mountain Ben Nevis. She has often been equated with the ancient Greek goddess Hecate, seen as being not only queen of the fairies, but also of witches and the dead. Nearby Wales also gives us a rich vein of fairy gods and goddesses, including Gwynap Nudd, the king of the... I'm not going to try because it's Welsh. The Welsh fairy race, we'll say, who rules the Welsh underworld. Anwin, who leads the wild hunt with his fairy hands. I meant to say his hands, yes, his fairy hands. I meant fairy hounds. I'm so sorry. If we can't have fun together, then, what's the point? In other lands, similarly blurred lines may be found between fairy and deity. Within Nordic tradition, we find gods such as Loki, who is descended from giants, who again are defeated by the Nordic pantheon, and Freyr, who is the king of Alfheim, the land of the light elves. In fact, the Nordic gods are separated into two races, the Aesir and the Vanir. The Vanir share many qualities with fairy races such as the Sidhe, such as great beauty and the gifts of prophecy and sorcery. They are also deeply connected to agriculture and the land. In his book Leechcraft, Stephen Pollington tells us that while the North myths mostly concern the main two races of gods, Aesir and Vanir, the poetic tradition often juxtaposes Aesir and Alvar as gods and elves. The name Freyr or Frey translates as Lord, and the name of his twin sister of the Vanir, Freya, translates as Lady. But it is unclear whether there is any connection to the title sometimes given to the trooping fairies of lords and ladies, or indeed the titles of the Wiccan god and goddess, who are often referred to as Lord and Lady. It would appear to be no more than a curious coincidence. However, Freya also has some definite parallels with Faery, being the psychopomp queen of the Valkyries, who, with their connection to battle and the dead, as well as association with ravens, displays some strong connections to the Irish Morgan. Freyr is sometimes referred to as a horned god, and like horned gods of other traditions, he is strongly associated with fertility, both of humans and the land itself. Indeed, most deities that are considered to be kings of Faery are depicted as horned, and have some association with fertility, like Pan of Greek mythology. Many display a voracious sexual appetite and priapic qualities, which are normally combined with a lack of morality, as we would understand it. So ladies, be warned. These are real and very powerful energies. Other horned gods, who are also considered kings of Faery, include Cernunnos of Celtic tradition, Herne the Hunter of English folklore, and Gwynap Nudd and his earlier counterpart Arwen of Welsh mythology. Veles or Volos of the Slavic culture is another horned god, who, though not overtly linked to the fairy lore of that land, is seen as ruler of the underworld and the dead. Similarly, the ram-horned god of ancient Egypt, Khnum, was associated with fertility in the underworld. There's a word that I can't pronounce. This role is strongly associated with Faery, as both the ancestors and the fairy race may be found in the underworld. When we look at deities who are considered to be fairy queens, we can also see some striking commonality. Goddesses who rule over Faery are usually associated with war and battle, and quite often take a psychopomp role in that they can travel between worlds and guide the souls of the slain on their journey to the underworld. They invariably are considered sorceresses and shapeshifters with powerful skills in the magical arts, and usually with similar animal associations such as ravens, horses, serpents, wolves, or dogs. A gift that these goddesses also seem to have in common is the gift of prophecy, often playing a hand in the fates they predict of mortals. This is particularly interesting when we consider that the name Faery